All right, let's dive straight into a seriously fascinating historical and theological mystery from the ancient text of 1 Chronicles, chapter 17. We're going to unpack a narrative that completely challenges our basic assumptions about what God truly wants. It centers around a massive, ambitious building project that was fundamentally rejected by the very deity it was meant to honor. To set the stage here, we have King David. He's finally achieved peace, and he's living in this incredibly luxurious palace made of premium cedarwood. But one day, he looks out from his gorgeous home and sees the Ark of the Covenant, which is the ultimate symbol of God's presence for the Israelites, just sitting outside under a humble, weathered tent. So David makes a decision. He's going to build God a magnificent, permanent temple.
Now, on the surface, this sounds like a beautiful, noble, and frankly, completely logical idea. David has the resources, he's got the devotion, and he just wants to honor God. But God's response to this grand architectural pitch was an absolute, unequivocal no. And that begs a massive question for us to explore in this explainer. Why on earth would God reject someone who is earnestly trying to build him a beautiful house?
To truly wrap our heads around this rejection, we have to take a step back. We need to look at the timeline of Israel's spiritual history leading right up to this exact moment. They moved from the wandering wilderness era through the really dark days of the Judges and finally to David's reign. And it's that middle period, the era of the Judges, that is absolutely key to understanding David's mindset.
You see, the era of the Judges was, well, it was absolute spiritual chaos. The 12 tribes were scattered all over Canaan without any central sanctuary. People were essentially making up their own religious rules as they went along. Just look at the story of a guy named Micah. He literally made his own household idol, he appointed his own son as a priest, and later on, he just hired a random passing Levite to do the job. Local shrines everywhere were mixing their faith with local idolatry. It was a total mess.
What's really wild here is how far the Israelites had strayed from the true definition of a priest. According to their law, only Aaron's descendants were supposed to guide the people in worship, but because everyone was so scattered and disconnected, that rule was completely tossed out the window. They were playing fast and loose with their spirituality, and that created a desperate, glaring need for a centralized, unified place of worship.
Enter King David. He swoops in and brilliantly solves this centuries-long chaos by bringing the Ark of the Covenant directly into his newly conquered capital, Jerusalem. By doing this, he gives these scattered tribes a single, definitive religious focal point. He literally merges the political center with the spiritual center on Mount Zion and finally brings true stability and unity to a deeply fractured nation.
So here's the crucial point. Just when David thinks the absolute next logical step to cement this centralized worship is to build a massive, permanent stone and cedar structure, God slams the brakes. Through the prophet Nathan, God delivers this definitive, stop you in your tracks message. You shall not build me a house to dwell in. But God doesn't just say no. He explains exactly why. He reminds David of their shared history, pointing out that he has always journeyed right alongside his people in tents, moving from place to place ever since they left Egypt. Through all that wild chaos of the Judges and all the long wilderness wanderings, God never once demanded a luxurious cedar building from any past leader.
And this illustrates a profoundly deep theological truth. You cannot box God into a human-made structure. Israel's ancient neighbors, they believed that if you built a grand temple, you essentially captured or housed the deity right there. But the God of Israel is saying, no, I share in your journeys. You do not contain me. Even David's son, Solomon, who actually did end up building a temple later, freely admitted that the highest heavens couldn't possibly contain God, let alone a simple building of stone.
Then, God completely flips the script on David. Think about it. David wanted to make a permanent one place for God. But God pivots and instead promises to make a secure one place for his people. God is effectively saying, listen, you don't need to build a house for me. I am going to build a house for you.
And before David can even process this massive shift, God reminds him of everything he has already done out of pure, unadulterated grace. He tells him, I took you from the pasture. I've been with you wherever you've gone. I have cut off your enemies. God is entirely shifting the focus from what humans can try to do for the divine to what the divine has already graciously done for humanity. Which brings us right to the core promise of this entire text. God says, and I will provide a place for my people Israel and will plant them so that they can have a home of their own and no longer be disturbed. He is promising a permanent, unshakable sanctuary.
a place where they will be planted forever, totally safe from the chaos that completely defined their past. Now hold on a second. If we stop right here, it's just a really nice story about King David. But to actually grasp the explosive power of this promise, we have to look at the historical context of the text itself. We have to ask, who was actually reading this specific version of the story in the Book of Chronicles?
The answer to that changes literally everything. You see, the Book of Chronicles wasn't written for people living during David's golden age. The original readers were living in the post-exilic era. These were Jews returning from decades of devastating exile in Babylon. For David, the city was secure. But for these readers, the walls were just ash. For Solomon, the temple was magnificent. For these readers, that exact same temple had been burned to the absolute ground by the Babylonians.
These original readers had lost absolutely everything: their homes, their walls, their security, and yes, their temple. So I want you to imagine being one of them for a second. Imagine reading God's ancient promise to David about providing a permanent, secure place to be planted while you are literally standing in the charred, uprooted ruins of Jerusalem. This is where the puzzle pieces finally snap together. Think about the logic here. If God's promised one place was meant to be the physical temple, well, then God's promise died the day the Babylonians burnt it down. But remember the twist? God initially told David not to build it. Therefore, the promise was never tied to a destructible building of cedar and stone in the first place. Because God rejected the physical temple as his ultimate dwelling, his promise remains perfectly intact. The true one place God promised is something that never burns. It completely outlasts any fire, any invading army, or any disaster you can imagine. It is a sanctuary that never, ever collapses. When absolutely everything else around you is crumbling under the weight of shifting times and historical chaos, this foundation holds firm. For the Christian tradition interpreting this text, the ultimate fulfillment of God's promise isn't a geographical location on a map at all. It's a person. The eternal, true temple is Jesus Christ. You see, in that exact same chapter, God promised a royal lineage through David that would last forever. Historically, that lineage culminated in Jesus. And it's fascinating because during his life, Jesus explicitly referred to his own body as the true temple. He was proving that God's ultimate plan from the very beginning was to plant his people not in a geographical location that could be easily destroyed, but in the indestructible refuge of Christ himself. This ancient text carries a massive, life-altering implication for us today. It means that even when the things we work so incredibly hard to build in our own lives, our careers, our physical security, our carefully laid out plans, even when those are reduced to ashes, our true foundation remains completely untouched. So for anyone feeling uprooted, deprived, or scattered today, much like those ancient Israelites during the era of the Judges or those returning exiles standing in the rubble, the invitation of this text is crystal clear. Stop relying on destructible things. Stop trying to box God into the fragile structures you build, and instead anchor yourself entirely on this eternal promise.
As we wrap up this explainer today, I want to leave you with a provocative thought to carry with you. Take a hard, honest look at what you are building. What in your life is currently shaking, and where are you truly planted? Are you relying on a physical structure that can burn, or are you securely anchored in the eternal refuge?